Oh hey, we're doing a behind the art episode on my fail file collection, which is 256 Kill Screen. It's been a while since I've done one of these. This one's jumped the queue a bit because I haven't finished recording the Falling Water one yet. Anyway, in this video we are going to cover what Earth Fail File is and being part of a group show rather than just me as an individual artist. Then the overall design of the artwork, some of the thinking behind it, just in brief, how this artwork is different from what you normally see from me and some of the reasons for that, and then how this artwork is connected to my previous work, what the through line is and where it sits within the context of the rest of my work. Then we'll wrap up with a fractionally more technical look where we'll highlight a couple, I think 3 of the techniques for the more geeky, nerdy inclined. As a rule, I generally don't do shows for a couple of reasons. The first is I'm quite happy over here in my own place, doing my own thing, working at my own pace. And honestly, this, working on my own stuff, takes up most of my time. I'm very content with where I feel as I am as an artist in my career, just ticking along. The other is that there's always someone better, younger, and who could do with the exposure much more than me. I know it's not the same as pulling up the ladder behind you, but if I take up a slot in a show, then I'm possibly depriving somebody else of an opportunity to get their work in front of more people. So I tend to say no. And if somebody does ask me, I can provide a list of other artists who may have not had the same chances as me. I was an early on art blocks artist, so I can use that position to step back and then hopefully push others forward. However, Fail File and the group of artists I had a chance to work with was just too tempting. So I'm really sorry, upcoming artist, but I'm having this one for a change. It's just too good, too irresistible to turn down. So Fail File is an art gallery that's focused on both highly respected digital artists and new pioneering ones. It's not just about generative art, lots of digital art, and it's looking for those artists sort of worldwide, globally. It also has a really strong emphasis with working on very talented curators, trusting them to put together an exhibition. It was co-founded by Casey Reese, who is also the co-creator of the processing language, along with Ben Fry, and the author of many books. A lot of artists in this space will be doing what they're doing because the foundation's put in place by Casey. This group show, N=12, is created by Aaron Penny, who works for Art Blocks, and he's worked with all sorts of groups as well as individual artists, as well as being also an early Art Blocks artist himself. Also fairly fundamental to founding a thing called the Gen Art Club, which is a shadowy secret organization that runs the generative art world from behind the scenes. That's not true. That last bit is a complete lie. Anyway, there are 12 artists in this show. I'll be displaying the names of them probably over here and you'll recognize them. I don't want to just say there like 1 or 2 of them because it'll seem like I'm playing favorites and it'll take too long to say all 12 of them and I'll probably get some of them wrong. This group show is slightly different in that it's not just 12 artists who have a brief or a title and they're submitting a piece near the end under that banner, but we've been working together. We've spent the last several months in a Discord group and weekly Zoom sessions, code sharing, critique, idea sharing, support, both technical and emotional, because to be honest, the last year has been quite a ride for a whole bunch of us. So it's nice to have that support. And the artworks are being sold in sets of 12. So you can't just buy one piece, you buy a set from each of the artists. Some collectors will keep all those together. Some will probably keep 1 or 2, then break them apart. That's up to them really. But anyway, just trying to take a step back for a moment. That is an amazing group of artists and me from right within the Gen Art scene. And I'm not at all surprised that Fail File chose to launch their new version, their version 2 of the site with this collection. And I know I'm biased, but this is genuinely something special, even if I wasn't part of it. So this is why I said yes to this one and all that stuff. And I'll talk about how the group dynamic played into my own designs in the next section. The very high-level overview of this artwork is, what if the internet never got its World Wide Web? When people would telnet into places or use dial-up to go to a BBS and it was all text-based? What if the technology of those BBSs and all those text communication systems just kept developing and we never had Netscape Navigator, we never had the browser? what would generative art look like now on a modern, updated VT100 terminal? So my history in starting to code is on a BBC Micro home computer in the UK. It's an 8-bit thing. You plug it into the TV and you have this glowing rectangle sort of showing you all these colors, and they're black, white, red, green, cyan, yellow, magenta, blue, and the pixels are really chunky. Really big pixels. So that's where my digital art started. And then fast forward a few years and I'm finishing my arts degree, and I must confess that when we left, we didn't always initially pay for our software. So that copy of Photoshop would come from a BBS or off a CD-ROM, or you'd know a guy. And there was a crack, and there was a file called a .nfo file, short for info, because you could only have those 3 character extensions back in those days. And what was in there was not only all the information, obviously, but also all this amazing ASCII art. And this art was often done by teenagers, very young people who were very technically literate and then slightly edgy, meaning there was be quite a lot of skulls or swords or demons in this ASCII artwork. And there was also quite a lot of crossover at the time with the demo scene, but that's a separate thing. So in this, I'm taking the edginess of those NFO files and the font and colors of the BBC Micro, and the name of the artwork comes from level 256 of the arcade Pac-Man game. And I don't think they expect people to really get there, but when you do get there, there's a buffer overflow that looks a bit like this. It causes the screen to kind of break up, so I'm borrowing from that. And I'm tying all that together with the very recent AI GAN image generation. So that's where all the skulls and images are coming from. And then also in there, there's a precursor to the large language models, the LLMs, in the form of a Markov chain, which is generating a very bad story in real time, which I'll explain more in the technical details. But the short of that is I use GPT-4 to write a number of short stories based on the idea of a BBC microcomputer trapped in hell, trying itself to escape by coding its way out using the basic language to make a portal. Which that story is then fed into JavaScript, which then gets remixed in real time. All of that is pulled together into a modern generative art collection that also corrupts over time. I've got it corrupting over time, and then it's also repairing itself to create this endless animation until eventually a memory leak will kill it, or the heat death of the universe, whichever comes first, I guess. I hope that makes the work make a bit more sense, why it looks how it does. For some people, this may seem like a very different style of artwork for me. And it is, kind of. It's not that it's animated, because I've done animated work before, and it's not that it's retro, because I've definitely done that before. I think what it is this is not a print project. I'm more generally known for doing print-orientated work, like often graphic design with solid slabs of color and smooth gradients that would look good as a print, as a poster. That's the idea, at least. That's the aim. Or the more delicate outputs of using a pen plotter, where I'm working with lots of fine lines and fountain pens. Whereas this is neither of those things. It's not for pen plotting, and it's not designed for print. It's designed primarily for digital display, and it's not even designed for static image display. It's supposed to be animated, although at the moment most people will see it as a static, and hopefully it survives this video compression as well, because it's very kind of bitty. This is kind of made to be displayed on your digital billboard in your virtual Cyberpunk 2077 apartment, is probably the easy way of saying it. Some future digital display. I think this is quite close to Anna's Oscillation 2 from a collection regards anyway in animation. But quickly, being in the group show allows 2 things to happen. The first is it's actually made me more okay with cutting previous avenues of exploration short. On my own, I may have taken one of my earlier ideas, concepts, and then just kept pushing it, even if I wasn't feeling it. But when I'm explaining it to the group in a critique session, and I have those feelings of, oh, I'm trying to convince my friends that this is a good idea, when I'm not even confident in it myself. I can't explain it properly, I can't back it up. And because I could also see other people are trying different things, I was more than happy to go, okay, I'll kill this idea. I mean, I can come back to it later and then try this other thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. And I think deep down what I really wanted to do was this final artwork that I've come up with that's different to my other stuff. And the second thing was kind of having this safety net. That's not quite the right word, but being in this group show, I didn't need to do what I always do. If ever I was going to do something different and something that had been bouncing around in my head for quite a while, then now with the farewell file show was definitely the time to do it. Okay, let's move on to... Okay, let's try and make this quick. Although it's different to my other designs, there is actually a through line. So the font that I've used, which is based on the BBC Micro font, I previously used in my 80s pop project on art blocks. In that collection, there was not one, but 2 playable games, which I think makes them the second and third games with their code fully on the blockchain on art blocks. The first one is a breakout kind of clone. One of those games, loosely based on Qbert, uses the BBC Micro font for the high scores at the top, and also kind of this demo scene style sine wave trick for the game over. I nearly put the story, which we'll come to in a second, as a scrolling ribbon of text that was constantly going across the screen, but it kind of changed the whole focus and composition of the artwork, so I ditched that, and now I have the story appearing as 3-word blips on the screen instead. The AI images come from kind of how I used them in Dub Be Good to Me and its follow-up Dub Be Gooder to Me on FXHash. I'm actually fascinated by the post-photography point we're at the moment, which is where photographers are using their skill with photos along with AI and also code to really push the boundaries. On FXHash fairly early, I saw some photographers hop on and work with code for the first time. It was a delight, and try to push what they were doing. And they sort of got rejected by the collectors there, as it wasn't seen as proper generative art unless it was 100% code base. Like, oh yeah, that's generative art, but it's less because you're using photos, rather than this is photography, but it's more because you're using code. I mean, it's amazing when a photographer takes their work and then adds code to it, even learning code to add to it. Dub Be Good to Me was stubbornly dipping into that post-photography with AI art plus code pool. It wasn't very commercially successful, but that's kind of the collectors over there. And it's certainly an area I'm going to keep on exploring because it's brilliant. It's a lovely area. But I have the feeling that collectors on Farewell File think a lot differently about digital art than the collectors on FXHash. Anyway, that's where some of the AI imagery has been brought over, and some of the imagery was also driven from the AI story about the BBC Micro escaping from hell. The Markov chaining is based off JavaScript work I did back in 2017, where I'd feed code from multiple sources of books I was working with Alice in Wonderland at the time, and mush them together, then spin out new nonsensical stories. So let's get into that a little bit with some. There's quite a lot going on in the code, obviously, so without this turning into like an hour-long deconstruction of all that, I wanted to quickly hit on just 3 things. The first is color, because this won't be obvious, but I wanted to share it anyway. Each image that goes into the system gets processed in 3 different ways. The first is it takes all the colors in the image and then it maps them to the closest 8-bit BBC Micro colors, so the black, white, red, green, blue, yellow, cyan, magenta, in their pure, solid, completely saturated state. The second is it maps to those same colors, but it allows luminosity. So instead of having just solid red, you can have dark red all the way up to light red. And the third is it just takes the source image colors and then it uses those. Then what it's doing is it's kind of moving backwards and forwards between those 3 styles, sometimes even at a pixel letter level, and sometimes over the whole image. There's also a number of timers which are going on, which control how quickly the image changes, and then the style changes, and then again on each individual pixel or letter, how quickly those change back and forth. So different letters in the same image might have different frequencies going on. Some are changing on every 4th frame, while some are changing on every 5th, and some are changing on every 6th, and so on. And you kind of get that scintillating look, particularly around the edges. The second part I want to hit is the data processing, and this is a little bit nerdy. Initially, the images to be used in each artwork would be loaded into the code to be processed to map all the pixels to the colors that I'm going to use in those 3 different schemes, and then that final data will get used. The image will get loaded in, but then you would have this overhead as the code processed them, which had a little bit of a delay. I decided to change that to pre-process all the images, to generate the data first and then load in just that raw data as a JavaScript file, so I didn't have to do any of the processing work in code itself. And pre-processing stuff is a whole art form in itself. Anyway, we won't go there. However, here in the studio, originally, I had really slow internet, and I still do kind of, and FeralFile uses a CDN, a content delivery network, which is optimized for caching files that are used frequently and then serving them really quickly, like the JavaScript, like the site. But because my code, when it asks for a file for the first time, and each artwork uses a number of different source images and there's hundreds of them, the CDN wouldn't have that cached. It wouldn't know about that file yet. Instead, it would load into cache, and this is called a first hit, which is often slower, and then serve it across my slow network to my code to pre-process it. And that was a lot of network stuff going on, and it was quite slow. And then also the CDN clears out those files when they haven't been used for a while. So it really suffered from that first hit problem of you come visit it, it needs to load it all into the CDN and then across again. So that was giving quite a bad experience for the collector when they're first viewing it. But at this point, I already had the code in place to load in JavaScript, not images, so I compromised and had it doing half-half. I do a little bit of pre-processing to turn the image into JavaScript, and then I load that into the code and it does all the processing. It's kind of interesting as an artist to use all the techniques that you use as a software engineer, and particularly a network software engineer, to make sure that you're streamlining the loading of all this data. And what I also added to the code to kind of represent that a little bit is that images slowly corrupt over time. You get bad pixels and bad letters here or there, but then it tries to repair itself by throwing out a whole image and then loading in a new one. So that's what's going on. Finally, the Markov chain, the hell escape story that generates both images and text. Very simply, a Markov chain is looking at the probability of what things happen next based on what you currently have. A better way of saying that is if I took all the fairy tales and fed them to a system and you give them the 3 words once upon A, and then ask for all the words that have ever appeared after once upon A and the ratio that they've appeared in, statistically the most likely next word is time. You then add that to the end of the current words and knock the first one off, and then you get 3 new words upon a time. And then you repeat the process. The next words could be A, or more likely there. So upon a time A, something, upon a time there was a dragon, was a witch, there was a kind old, there was an angry, and so on. You keep sticking the most recent 3 words onto the chain, getting rid of the ones at the start, and then you keep getting new words out. And when you string all those words together, it's sort of seemingly meaningful because they kind of make sense. But when you look at the whole thing, it's just kind of rambling, a bit like me there. This is an image I created to show the results of taking a book by Jeff Noon called Channel Skin and throwing it through the system. What it created was, the whole forest has been anesthetized, her temples wired, her senses stimulated, her eyes were not on Eva, not on Eva, not on Eva, not on anybody in the same realm, the land of dreams and nightmares. It sort of makes sense, but it really doesn't. At least the words go together. You can also see all the paths it could have gone down. Like, the whole forest has been lifted up once more, which as an option would have taken us down a completely different path. The rest of the story would have gone somewhere else. And here it got caught up on not on Eva, not on Eva, not on Eva, until it finally broke free with a not on anybody. A Markov chain is very much a precursor to where we are now with the LLMs, and for this artwork it at least has the benefit of being very quick to train on the source text, and it can be run client-side, plucking out new words in real time. I think that'll probably be enough for now. As you can tell, I could probably talk for hours, not only about the artwork, but also about the history and the technical stuff leading up to it. It's maybe not the prettiest artwork, and I'll admit that, but I really wanted to create something that captured a lot of my feelings on technology, art, and my route through it to get to this point. And if I can't do something different, interesting, challenging on FeralFile, then where can I do it? Surely this is the place, and I'm really pleased with the end result. I'll put links to all the places this project is happening below if you're a collector, and there's only going to be like 130 of you. I hope that helps you read and understand the artwork. If you're interested in me as an artist, this should put this collection and why it looks how it does in the context with the other art I make. And if you're interested in generative art as a whole, perhaps there were a couple of fun things in there for you that you might be able to use. Not sure. I will catch you for the next video, which should be about falling water, and then a whole bunch of pen plotting tutorials. I may even start doing some generative art tutorials. We'll see. I'll see you next time, and if you have any questions, then drop them into the comments below. I will do my best to answer. Goodbye.